Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar. I'd like to introduce today's presenter. Mikhail Kashubsky is a senior lecturer at the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies and head of Secretariat of the International Network of Customs Universities. He is a graduate of the University of Canberra and a qualified Australian lawyer. Mikhail teaches several subjects at the University of Canberra, including International Commercial Transactions Law, International Supply Chain Management and Transnational Crime. His research interests include international trade law, customs law, offshore oil and gas law, maritime security law and marine environment pollution law. He has also written publications on these topics. Without further ado, I'll hand you over to Mikhail now to begin his presentation.
Thank you, Lily, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar this afternoon, or it may be morning actually for some of you, depending on where you're located. In this webinar, the topic is international supply chain security, and in this webinar we will briefly look at four things. We'll look at the background to supply chain security, key concepts and key players involved in the supply chain management, threats and risks that impact on international supply chain, the role of customs in securing international trade, including the changing role of customs and facilitation against intervention, regulatory responses, particularly international regulatory responses and initiative of various international organizations, as well as a quick summary of the US regulatory initiatives and measures. But before we talk about security, we need to answer a key question: what is supply chain security? And there are three concepts that can help us to answer this question. First is we need to know what supply chain is, then what supply chain management is, and what supply chain security management is. So the supply chain can be defined as the combination of organizations and service providers that manage the raw material sourcing, manufacturing, and delivery of goods from the source of the commodities to the ultimate end users. The supply chain management can be defined as an inter- or intra-organizational coordination of the sourcing, production, inventory management, transportation and storage functions with the objective of meeting the service requirements of consumers or users at the minimum cost. And supply chain security management can be defined as the application of policies, procedures and technology that protect supply chain assets, such as products, facilities, equipment, information and personnel, protecting from theft, damage or terrorism, and to prevent the introduction of unauthorized contraband, people or weapons of mass destruction into the supply chain. The security of the international trade came into sharp focus following the terrorist attacks in the United States on 11th of September 2001. As a result, and understandably, the United States was the initiator of many of the international regulatory initiatives in transport and in supply chain security. While most of the attention focused on new security protocols in the United States, security plans and security arrangements in other parts of the world have also been revised and strengthened. And governments have realized that they must work together with the private sector or other governments in order to provide security throughout the entire supply chain. And on this slide, we can see an illustration of an attack, of a terrorist attack on maritime transport, and in particular this incident happened in October 2002, and it was an attack on the French tanker Limburg in Yemen, and the method of attack used by terrorists was the explosive-laden boat. So this is an example of transport, means of transport being used as a weapon in the attack. And in this attack, one of the crew member was killed, but the economic consequences of this attack were much more significant. The insurance rates of ships that were calling at ports in Yemen were significantly increased. So there were additional costs on shipping companies, and as a result, many ships started diverting to different ports in the neighboring countries. So there was also a significant loss of revenue for Yemeni port authorities. So the point I wanted to make here is that there can be significant economic costs related to attacks on supply chain. Port security has been dramatically strengthened since 9/11. For example, the funding in the US has increased by more than 700% since September 2001, and funding for port security was approximately 259 million in 2001. By comparison, in 2005, port security cost approximately 1.6 billion. So you can see how dramatically spending on security has increased. On this slide, we can see some key players that are involved in the supply chain. On the export side, we have exporters, freight consolidators, terminal operators, freight forwarders, and in the middle here we have a carrier, and in this case it is a maritime transport, but it could well be a picture of airplane instead. So a carrier is also a part of the supply chain. Then we have, on the import side, we have the importer, of course, customs broker, customs inspection, and terminal operators. So these are some of the key players, but not all. Depending on the transaction type, there could be other players involved in the supply chain. There are different threats to supply chain, but the main threat is terrorism. And terrorism can be defined as politically or ideologically or religiously or socially motivated violence directed generally against non-combatants, in other words, against civilians, and intended to shock and terrify in order to achieve a strategic outcome. The other two threats that are listed here are piracy and organized crime. And although piracy is a form of organized crime, I've listed it separately because it is quite a unique type of crime. In the last 20 years, we have seen a marked acceleration in the trend towards globalization. And the benefits arising from globalization have not been confined to legitimate entities. It has also increased the scope and reach of terrorist groups and various criminal networks. And the globalized media enables terrorist organizations to touch a wider audience and publicize their goals or their causes across the world much more easier. The worst case scenario that everyone is concerned about is the possibility of importation of a weapon of mass destruction inside a container and then subsequent detonation of that weapon in the country of import. And you can imagine if a nuclear bomb was detonated in a city like New York, that it could have just dramatic impacts. But another point I would like to make is that weapons of mass destruction, they are not limited to nuclear devices. It could be radiological or biological devices that can bring equally terrible effects or consequences if the attack occurs. So the economic impact of terrorism is also a very important factor, and terrorist activities can have global impact. An attack in one country can have impact on other countries, and response to fear of these attacks may also lead to significant impacts. And those responses can include, for example, the supply chain security regimes have been put in place in the United States and are being proposed by the international bodies. And trading partners and economies in the countries who cannot meet the new security standards may be affected economically because they will not be seen as a favorable trading partner, so that can have economic impacts on countries. In this example, I would like to show you the supply chain security of oil and gas. And the reason I selected oil and gas is because it is kind of an unusual commodity, but it can have significant economic impacts. It is vital for the economy. And there have been previous instances of attacks on oil and gas infrastructure. So we have the offshore platforms here at the extraction point. We have tankers and pipelines that are used for transportation of oil and gas. We also have storage facilities, refineries, and petrol stations that are also part of the supply chain of oil and gas. Now, we already looked at the example of an attack on an oil tanker Limburg in Yemen, but some of the methods of attacking a tanker could be a direct attack using explosive-laden boats. There have been some hijackings of tankers, including kidnapping of crew for ransom, and as well as the use of hijacked ships as weapons, for example, to ram them into a port. There have also been attacks on pipelines or pipeline bombings, as you can see on this illustration here. And another recent trend in supply chain security of oil and gas is oil theft. And in some countries, such as Nigeria, an oil theft is considered one of the biggest, if not the biggest, illicit businesses. Now, what is the role of customs in supply chain security? And the traditional approach of customs, as you know, was the gatekeeper approach strategy. But then there was a move towards the balance between trade facilitation and regulatory intervention. But following September 11th, 2001, the supply chain security initiatives are tipping the balance in favor of regulatory intervention rather than in favor of trade facilitation. On this slide, this quote is from the Commissioner for Taxation and Customs of the European Union. His quote was that the challenge for customs nowadays is to offer the best possible service to traders and citizens in a planet characterized by economic globalization, by the rapidly increasing trade flows, and by the worldwide security threats. The economic operators ask for a quicker release of goods, the citizens fear the threats, the consumers want safe products, and this is against this background that customs are confronted with apparently contradictory objectives: the facilitation of trade, calling for faster control of merchandise flows, and the security of our citizens, calling for more effective controls. And the challenge for customs is to strike the right balance between the two. And I have underlined this to emphasize this challenge that customs administrations are facing. So the customs administrations have important powers that are quite unique amongst government agencies. They have authority to inspect all cargo imported to or exported from a country. And customs is an agency that is primarily tasked by governments to secure trade against the threat of international terrorism. And For advanced customs administrations, this new responsibility can be managed within their existing processes, but it demands much more focus. For customs administrations in developing countries, this challenge is much more significant because unless they can be seen to be adopting the international standards for supply chain security, they face the possibility of becoming an unfavorable trading partner. And only a strengthened relationship with business will develop the trust necessary to ensure that trade can continue to flow in this new era of heightened security. And some of the regulatory responses have been put in place on the international arena, and a number of international organizations have responded to the terrorism threat by developing international standards to guide member countries in implementing appropriate security standards and responses. And these, the main organizations are the International Maritime Organization, IMO, International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and World Customs Organization, WCO. And we will now look at some of the security measures adopted by each of these organizations. In 2002, the IMO members adopted a series of measures to strengthen the maritime security and with the aim of suppressing acts of terrorism against shipping. Some of the matters were referred to the World Customs Organization to deal with, but some were implemented by the IMO. And the main instrument that IMO has created is the International Ship and Port Facility Security Code, or ISPS code in short. The ISPS code basically takes the approach that ensuring the security of ships and ports is basically a risk management activity, and an assessment of the risks must be made in each particular case. The ISPS code applies to all cargo ships of 500 gross tons or above, to all passenger ships, to mobile offshore drilling units and port facilities serving vessels on international voyages. Some of the requirements include the security assessments that must be carried out on ships or at ports. Each ship or port to which this code applies must have a security plan. It must have security officers and dedicated security personnel. And the ISPS code basically can be seen as representing a mandatory dialogue between ports and vessels. For example, ships that call at a security-regulated port must provide certain information prior to its arrival, such as the details of cargo carried on board, details of crew members, etc. A ship must comply with the ISPS code security requirements in order to be permitted entry into a security-regulated port. So this is just a summary of what the ISPS code is about. The International Civil Aviation Organization has also introduced a number of measures. Under the Chicago Convention, the ICAO adopts standards and recommended practices for safeguarding of international civil aviation. In 2002, 17 new standards were added, and they include various definitions and new provisions to apply Article 17 to domestic operations. It introduced measures for international cooperation relating to threat information, also measures related to passengers and their cabins and hold baggage, as well as in-flight security personnel and protection of the cockpit. Additional amendments were adopted by ICAO in November 2005, and the amendments include one-stop security concept for passengers and baggage, security for all cargo operations, and another important development in the aviation was the introduction of regulated agents. And the amendments further specify the requirements in relation to regulated agents in air cargo. For example, standards 453 of Annex 17 required that airline operators carry on passenger flight only consignments of cargo or parcels or mail, the security of which has been accounted for by a regulated agent or which has been subjected to other security controls. So the new standards require contracting states to establish a process for approval of regulated agents if such agents are involved in implementing security controls. So after September 11, 2001, many countries have already adopted this level of standard in relation to regulated agents. The World Customs Organization has developed the framework of standards to secure and facilitate global trade. Its short name is Safe Framework of Standards. And this framework attempts to secure the movement of global trade in a way that continues to facilitate the movement of trade. One of the key aspects of Safe Framework is that it recognizes the need to partner with business in a new and in a more integrated way. And the latest version of Safe Framework of Standards was produced by the World Customs Organization in June 2012, and it's available on the WCO website for download. On this slide, this diagram shows the key features of the Safe Framework of Standards. There are two pillars in the framework, and they are customs to customs pillar and customs to business pillar. And there are four core elements in this whole program. And these elements are the harmonized advanced electronic cargo information, the consistent risk management approach using cargo data, outbound examination of high-risk consignments using non-intrusive detection equipment, and benefits for businesses that meet minimal supply chain security standards. The main objectives of the Safe Framework of Standards are the end-to-end security, certainty and predictability of customs procedures, seamless movement of goods in international trade, integrated supply chain security for all transport modes, closer cooperation amongst customs administration, and stronger customs to business cooperation. Some of the benefits of the Safe Framework of Standards include the benefits to nation states and the benefits to customs administration. And the benefits to nation states are security and facilitation of trade, economic growth and development, improved revenue collection, economic and social protection, support of foreign investments. And some of the benefits to customs administrations are the exchange of accurate electronic information in a timely manner, improved control of imports and exports, better allocation of resources, and customs reform and integrity improvement. There are two pillars, as I said earlier, in the Safe Framework. Customs to customs pillar, which contains 11 standards, and customs to business pillar that contains 6 standards. We will not discuss each of these standards in this webinar, but if you are interested, please go on the WCO website and download the Safe Framework of Standards and have a look at these standards in more detail on each one of these. But what I would like to talk briefly about is the concept which is central to the Safe Framework is the Authorized Economic Operator concept, or AEO. And the Safe Framework defines an AEO as a party involved in the international movement of goods in whatever function that has been approved by or on behalf of a national customs administration as compliant with WCO or equivalent supply chain security standards. Authorized economic operators can include, amongst others, manufacturers, importers, exporters, brokers, carriers, consolidators, other intermediaries, ports, airports, terminal operators, warehouses, and other distributors. So there is quite a broad range of persons or service providers that can be authorized economic operators. Now we've looked at the major international supply chain security initiatives, but the United States has introduced quite a large number of its own initiatives to improve security in the supply chain. And again, I will not go into discussing these elements, but if you're interested, please go online and just type in the name of this initiative, and there's plenty of information on each of these initiatives. But one of the points that I would like you to take from this webinar is that there is a layered approach to security, different security layers in the supply chain. On this diagram, you can see the various supply chain layers. For example, the first layer is called early detection, and this includes things like advanced cargo information, risk management. The second layer of protection, of second security layer, is certification and credentialing. This relates to companies or service providers being recognized as authorized economic operators or as registered agents in case of aviation security. The third layer of security is scanning technology. This includes the non-intrusive scanning methods. Another layer of protection is container integrity. This includes seals and other technologies used in that regard. And finally, the fifth layer shown here is the International Ship and Port Security Code, and things like vessels tracking, the automatic information system, and long-range identification of and tracking of ships. So there is multiple layers of protection. So if a threat bypasses one layer or breaches one layer, it is likely that the incident will be prevented by other security layers, or at least detected. So this is what we mean by a layered approach when we talk about supply chain security. On this diagram, you can see the compulsory programs that all states must follow. For example, the International Ship and Port Security Code, or if a particular company is trading with the United States, it may be subject to the compulsory United States rules or United States security requirements. For example, the 100% scanning, or the 10+2 rule, or for example the pre-arrival and pre-departure information, as the case in the European Union. This next diagram shows the major voluntary programs, such as an authorized economic operator program. Companies have a choice of whether to become an authorized economic operator or not to become, so it's a voluntary. Other voluntary programs include the Container Security Initiative or the World Customs Organization Safe Framework of Standards. This slide shows some of the major regional and national supply chain security programs. For example, I mentioned earlier the long-range identification and tracking of ships. For example, a country can monitor and request or receive detailed information about ships that are not even calling in ports in this country, but are simply passing near it within the range of 1,000 nautical miles. Other regional and national security initiatives include the U.S. Secure Freight Initiative, or SFI. As a summary, I would like to briefly just outline what we've covered in this webinar. We looked at the background to the supply chain security, some of the key concepts and players in the supply chain, threats and risks in the supply chain security. We also looked at the role of customs in ensuring the security of supply chain, and we discussed some of the regulatory responses to supply chain security. mainly the initiatives of the World Customs Organization, International Maritime Organization, and International Civil Aviation Organization, as well as we listed some of the United States initiatives in the supply chain security. We've only covered a small amount of issues which we could have covered due to time limitation, but we do have a postgraduate unit called International Supply Chain Management. The security of supply chain is just one of the topics that is covered in that unit, and it is a postgraduate unit. It can be taken as an elective in Master of International Customs Law and Administration program, and some of the other programs offered at CCES or at the University of Canberra. And this unit is normally offered in September 1, and it will be offered in September 1, 2013. And the normal period is between February and May. We also have International Supply Chain Management non-award course, vocational training course or short course, and it is available all year round and can be tailored to meet your particular needs. Some of the topics that are covered in this postgraduate unit or in this vocational training course include background and key concepts in the supply chain management, regulation of global supply chain, the sale of goods and international commercial terms, maritime cargo, air cargo, depots and warehouses. We also look at risks in the global supply chain and operational elements of supply chain. We study the offshoring phenomenon and the recent trends in global supply chain management, and we devote quite a significant portion of the course to security, where we look at the background to security and U.S. responses, international and regional responses, and customs and business role in securing international trade. And in this unit we study these aspects in much more detail than we did in this webinar. If you would like some further information about this course, you know how to get in touch with us, and the contact details are on our website or here on this slide. So please do not hesitate to contact if there are any questions or issues that you have. And I would like would be happy to take some questions from you. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Mikhail. We will answer some questions now. I'll just filter through them. Okay, yes, we have found one from Jessica. Her question is detonation of a nuclear bomb, which you mentioned, a realistic scenario?
Thank you, Jessica. Well, the scenarios can generally be grouped into two categories, more credible and less credible. Detonation of a nuclear bomb is probably a less credible scenario. Well, it is a less credible scenario because it has not occurred yet. It is believed that terrorists currently do not have nuclear capabilities, but may have such capabilities in the future. I mentioned, as I mentioned, the nuclear bomb is not the only type of weapon of mass destruction. There are other types of WMDs, such as biological and chemical weapons. But before 9/11, crashing airplanes into skyscrapers seemed like an unrealistic scenario, but it happened. So in summary, I would say that it is a realistic scenario, but a less credible scenario. Thank you, Jessica.
Okay, thanks, Mikhail. We will go on to the next question. Okay, here's a good one. Do you think all costs and spending on enhancement of supply chain security is warranted?
Thank you for your question. Well, this question, everybody is asking this question. Is it worth spending all this money on supply chain security? Maybe the level of threat is disproportionate to the amount of spending on security. I don't know what the answer is to this question, and different people may have different answers, and there is no consensus on this issue, and nobody really knows the exact answer. I think that spending on security is necessary, but some of the initiatives to improve security of the supply chain are more effective than the others in ensuring security. For example, in regards to AEO, each company will have to determine for themselves whether it is worth spending money on becoming an AEO, whether they will get enough benefits from becoming an AEO, and whether those benefits outweigh the costs. So I think the spending is necessary, but whether or not it is justified, I don't know. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mikhail. We do have time for just one more question tonight. Okay, the question is, what are the global experiences in customs gaining access to supply chain data to retrieve info for risk assessment?
Thank you for your question. And rather than answering this question directly, I would like to refer you to an article by David Heskes, who is a former student of the University of Canberra and currently working for the UK Customs. And the article was published in the World Customs Journal, and it is entitled Weakness in the Supply Chain, Who Packed the Box? And in that article, David has come up with an idea of seamless integrated data pipeline. And it is quite a good article which basically in very detail answers this question that was asked. And I will ask Lily to circulate that article to everyone who attended this webinar today. So thank you very much for your time.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mikhail, for a great presentation. I hope everyone found it useful. That is all the questions we have time for tonight. So thanks again. Thanks everyone for coming. So I will be sending out an online survey for everyone to complete. Please take the time to complete it, as we do very strongly value your opinion. As Mikhail mentioned, these courses are available not only as part of our postgraduate programs, but also available as vocational courses for government agencies and private industry. So if your company or organisation is interested in training in international supply chain security, then please contact me directly so that we can start discussions. Once again, thank you for attending tonight. I hope you can make our next webinar. That's topic 5, valuation, on Wednesday the 3rd of October, and that will be presented by our postgraduate course convener, Greg Wepner. Thank you.